Well, welcome to the Sunday recap on our Vine Talks podcast. My name is Dre Clark, and I'm joined with our senior pastor, Dr. Doug Page, today as we recap yesterday's message and go a little bit deeper into what we heard. So, Pastor, let's jump right in. We are in Habakkuk. Great message yesterday. A lot of good visuals, too, there at the end. And so I want to encourage people, if they didn't see it, if you want to really get the full effect, to go dive into the video portion of the sermon, go rewatch that.
Yeah, I wish we could reenact that.
I know, right? It'd be great to do.
that.
Yeah, I could put my feet up right over here.
Right, exactly.
A rocking chair would be nice, too.
Yeah,
as well,
no, that would be good.
All right, well, those who maybe are just missed the sermon and need a recap, go ahead and fill us in. What are we talking about? What was the outline yesterday?
I love Habakkuk. I do. I love it. It's one of my favorite smaller books in the Old Testament. It obviously points us toward our Redeemer. And that famous verse that we'll get to in just a second in chapter 2, verse 4, about the righteous shall live by faith. But just the bigger picture. So you have Josiah has died. You have some transition, which means there have been some good things in Judah. However, especially in Jeremiah, you see it. The people of God, once again, fall away. Idolatry, apostasy, and all of those things. So really here you have Habakkuk saying, okay, God, I'm looking at what's going on in the world. When will you bring justice? And he says, well, hold on just a second. I'm going to do that. But it's going to be done differently than what you think. And so he just starts spilling out how he's going to use the Chaldeans or Babylonian, that empire that was merged together to bring God's retribution against Israel, or against Judah specifically. And so he was struggling a little bit with that. And so he had some questions he asked, Lord, help me understand what you were doing. Help me see. I know that you're holy. I know you're righteous. But why are you silent and letting the wicked win? Why are you leaving us defenseless? And then when will you do something? And that's really kind of chapter 1. There's a whole lot more there we could cover, but that's chapter 1. And then in chapter 2, it's just a question, and I think it's such a great application for us is, what do you do when you don't understand? I mean, we all agree. Man, there are times we go, God, I don't get it. I don't understand what you're doing. Why are you allowing this to happen? And I think it's healthy to ask those questions. It doesn't mean we lack faith. It just means that we have a God that we're in relationship with that we can ask questions to. And so he asked the questions. But what I liked is in that first verse, there are 3 statements, and it is beautiful to me. It says, I will stand my watch post and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me. And there are 3 really big things to me. 1, stand your post. Don't run away. Stand. He went to where he was supposed to be, right in the middle of the battle. He didn't run away. He didn't go to the sidelines. He didn't do like David and stay home. King David did. Yeah. He went into the middle of it. And then to stay tuned in, I used some illustrations about that, but how we look to see what God is doing and then finally expect God to answer. And I think that's where we fall short sometimes. Do we have a God who answers our prayers? Yeah. Well, he expected God to say something to him. Of course, as a prophet, makes sense. Because God talked to him all the time. But for us, it's important to do that. And really, just in summary, God's answer is to trust me. Trust me. And I kind of went through some details about the vision that was to come. And again, the big picture we've been talking about is, yes, he's about to bring divine retribution. But he also says, oh, and by the way, I am going to punish the Babylonians too. Don't worry about that. Within 50 years, they're going to conquer you. And then within 50 years, they're gone. Right? Persia is going to overcome them. However, what I want you to do is trust me in this. And the bigger picture of the vision is that picture of divine restoration. God is calling his people back to himself. You have the Jews, and then you have the Gentiles, and then one day again, the engrafting again. So basically ended with the idea that verse that we've heard many times in chapter 2, verse 4, where it says, the righteous shall live by his faith. And use a couple illustrations by Vance Havner, an old pastor, who says that worry is like a rocking chair, gives you something to do, but you don't get anywhere. And then John G. Patton was a missionary to the cannibals in the South Pacific, and basically he was trying to interpret what can faith mean in that language. And I'll let everybody go watch the sermon and they will see it. But basically, he came up with the idea as faith is dropping your burden and stretching out on God. And so that's the picture of that. And that was the visual at the end that you were alluding to.
Yeah, I love it. I love that, where this book ends is it's unique in the sense of most time you get a prophecy, most time you get the prophets, we're used to this pattern of God comes to the prophet, through the prophet, to the people.
Right.
But this is a unique book because the prophet is actually initiating it.
He's the one, right?
He's asking these Q&A sessions of God.
That's right.
And it's not always this this nice, neat answer that God gives, but it does come to that, what you said. It's God says, "Do you trust me? I'm working all this out.
Right.
Nothing is happening
That's right.
that I don't see.
Yeah.
Nothing is happening that I'm not in control of.
That's right.
Nothing. There's all this. There's this free will dimension, but ultimately at the top of it, God is sovereign.
Right.
And so, do you trust that I'm in control? Do you trust that I'm going to work this out? And I am going to be just.
Right.
I am going to be merciful and gracious as well,
Right.
as He already has been. And
That's
so
true.
you get this good little dynamic of that, but I think it's unique, this idea of we can bring those questions to God. We can approach Him. And then, love where you ended with, which is, at the end of the day, this is really about this trusting faith, or the submissive faith, this faith that, that stretches out, that, they put your legs up, kind of, you're not just sitting there waiting, okay, God, I'm holding on all this stuff. It really is this idea of faith of, okay, God, I'm letting you be in charge, and I'm trusting you, and I'm going to do what you've called me to do. I'm going to live by faith in the meantime. So.
And the case here is the burden he let go of is he didn't understand.
Yeah. You
I mean, he knew God was
answers.
didn't know all the answers, and so instead of me trying to figure you out, God, I dropped that burden, and I'm going to trust you.
Yeah, I had a professor, reminds me of a quote a long time ago. He was being a little bit, how professors are, they kind of overstate things. But he told how oftentimes whenever we ask why of God, he says that's a really, satanic thing to do. And he's kind of leaning, because what it is, there's this heart of, when I'm asking God why, it's I need to know the answers. I have to know. I have to have this kind of arrogance, this pride. Like, if I don't understand it, well, then it must not be right.
Right.
And he says that kind of root of that pride, he said that's a really evil thing, And so this idea of we don't have to know. That's not our place. We're not going to try to usurp God. We're not going to try to get to that top and have to know how all the details work out.
Yeah,
we do have to put a place of trust. So
I agree with that.
Kind of an interesting. He's overstating it, of course.
That is a little much.
I agree, but I think the principle's there. We want to make sure whenever we go to God, we can question, but we need to end up at that place of trust.
That's right.
Yeah. So another 5 minutes of the message. What would you have said? What would you have, if you had another 5 minutes to talk about something, where would you have gone in Habakkuk this week?
So there was an angle that I approached, and of course didn't have time to look at, but I thought about how maybe a young Christian and a more mature Christian would approach God in this scenario. So we're going to assume that Habakkuk was a strong follower of God. Yeah. And when you think about the way God answers, when my kids were little and they were being a little hard-headed and maybe they just couldn't understand, sometimes a parent would say, well, just because. Yeah. Because that is what's best for you, right? And I think that sometimes happens in young Christians that, they're going, God, I don't understand, and say, you're just going to have to trust me. You're just going to have to trust me. You don't have to understand. And I think in this case with Habakkuk, he was willing to share a little bit of the story. Look, here's what I'm going to do, but I want you to know I'm not going to delay this vision. It's on time. I will never be late. And I think Habakkuk understood. I believe he knew all that. Once he heard God say that again, and he said, and this is how you're going to live. I know, and by the way, here's what I'm going to do. I think in some ways that satisfied Habakkuk. I mean, he obviously he prayed and went through a lot of more detail. But I think I would have taken a little more time to say, it's important for us as we check our spiritual maturity. We can always ask why, but how quickly do we run to that rest and not sit in the worry rocking chair?
Yeah. Well, it's that intent. Am I asking why? Because I demand to know.
Right.
That child-parent relationship. Right. I have to know this now, otherwise I'm not getting in the car. Right. Or is it I'm asking why because I generally want to be in that relationship and I really want to try to understand. Right. But therein lies the answer too. Part of that understanding who God is gives us that relationship. It gives us confidence even if we don't fully. Because how can we understand everything of God? How can we understand what He sees?
Can't happen.
It was a lot of like Job. Job has that same thing. You weren't there. You don't understand what's happening. Yeah. But it's understanding that that there's that parent relationship and trusting Him in there, and that's the heart of whenever you go to God. There's two different approaches. And I think that's what's going to be contrasted later on in. Especially around the righteous shall live by faith, it's being contrasted with this arrogance. Yeah. So we've got to be careful what's our motive.
That's true.
To God.
Very true.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's really good. I want to ask one more question. So you spent a lot of time talking about this really popular phrase, the righteous shall live by faith. You even mentioned in your message how the New Testament is going to pick up this text in 3 different places, and it's going to talk about this. The Reformers, way later in history, this is one of their main mantras that they're going to lead the Reformation with, and they're really going to focus on this idea of how do you become righteous, right? And we would all say that we are saved by grace through faith in Jesus. So faith is this means, and so, but you kind of emphasize something I think is often overlooked. I think the Reformers kind of overplayed their cards a little bit because they focused on how do you become righteous, but you talked about how do the righteous live.
That's right.
And really this idea of we live through faith. So the same way we're saved is the same way we live.
That's right.
But what's the correlation? So what do we do? How do the righteous live? Well, you've got to be made righteous to live.
Right.
But then how are we made righteous, and what does that connection look like when it comes to, do we have that same attitude whenever we come to faith as that we live in faith? How do those play together?
Yeah. So the Galatians 3:11 passage uses that phrase as well, and it reemphasizes the Romans 1:16 on how we are saved, or 17 actually, and how we are saved by faith. And so I can see how you would follow that. It is by faith that we are saved, that we are made righteous, no doubt about it. But I kind of mentioned this, but when you look through all of, especially the writings of Paul, you see this beautiful picture of how the righteous are to live. How are we to live? Are we living by works? Well, no, the foundation is faith. And so another way to say that phrase is those made righteous by faith shall live. And so because the other is more emphasized, I wanted to use that more. And then in Philippians chapter 3, where it talked about how Paul was living, he counted everything but loss. So again, all of those things he puts into the past. That's kind of the dropping the burdens. And that is that everything is that I am living by faith. I am stretching out on God. Paul was content because he stretched out on God. He was able to live his life this way because of that. And I think it's a theme throughout all of the New Testament. We are saved by grace through faith. That's how we are made righteous. We are declared righteous because of what Christ did for us. We're receiving what he did. But then that sanctification part, the transformation, how does it happen? It begins with faith. We've got to trust when he says this is the path, to say, I believe you. I trust you. I think that's the correlation.
Really what I'm hearing you say is it's one of they go together. They're separate, but they go together. And I think that oftentimes that's what trips us up is we come to faith, we come to salvation through faith, but we don't live out our sanctification the same way. So we have this moment where we trust God, we throw off that baggage, right? We rest out, we stretch out on God, like you said, but then we immediately start picking back up other things. We start trying to do it ourselves, and that's not the biblical image. It's not that you're just saved by this, but you live like this too. And so it's a continuation, and it's the same way that you're saved is the same way that you're sanctified, if you want to use that language. The same way that you come to Christ is the same way you continue to grow in Christ.
Well, you can also look at that phrase as more of a declarative. This is what's going to happen. Those made righteous are going to live by faith. Right? So you have that foundation of faith that now we still have to walk out that faith. Not salvific faith, if you will, but it's that faith that we trust. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, practically, Dre, practically for me, been a Christian for many years. Do I think that I no longer need faith? Of course I do. I need those times to be reminded of, but I'm able to do that because of the imputed righteousness that comes by that initial time of placing my faith in Christ. And now I have to walk it out. Well,
it makes sense. If you're walking a tightrope, right? It takes faith to step onto it, but you're going to have to keep trusting that tightrope the entire rest of your walk. And so it's one of the same, and you're continuing in it. Does this lead even to this conversation? Does that lead us to kind of this idea that a lot of Baptists, teach, which is once saved, always saved, that once you have this, it is going to work in your life. Once you have faith, that faith will be the constant, consistent in your life?
Absolutely. If it's true.
If
you have received Christ, if truly you have become, quote, born again, then yes, your faith will be that path.
Which is those made righteous, they will live by this.
They will.
Happen.
Yep, it's going to happen. That's right. Just like we are saved, we've been chosen to be transformed into the image of Christ. So that's the path, right? He wants to transform us. Well, how does that happen? By continuing surrender. By continuing to say, okay, God, I'm going to stretch out on you. I don't have to understand it all, but I believe, as going back to Habakkuk, that there's this vision of me becoming more like Christ. And so therefore, I'm going to keep walking this way. But the only way I can do it is by faith.
Love it. come to faith by faith, come to Christ by faith, right? You trust Him by faith and you live by faith.
Right.
Good message. Pastor, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you so much for a great message, and love Habakkuk. Where are we going next week? Which book are we going to be in?
Zephaniah is next.
Yeah.
And next, it's going to be great. So there's a song at the end of Zephaniah that's a beautiful celebration that talks about how not only that we rejoice over God, but that God rejoices over us. Now think about that. Yeah. And so I've been working with Kyle, our worship pastor, and so we're going to have a nice part of worship, of prayer time, and of course a message. But I think it's going to be a great Sunday.
Awesome, great.
And it's also casual Sunday. If people are show up in your tropical gear, have fun with it.
Be a great week. Well, we're looking forward to it. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks so much for listening to us. As you heard Pastor Doug just say, we'd love to have you come and be with us in person on a Sunday. 9:15 life group, 10:30 is the service. If not, you can come back here and see us for another Sunday recap. Have a good one.